Welcome to the debate. I'm the advocate.
And I'm the dissenter.
Today we are conducting an inquiry into what I believe is the single most critical flaw in the modern American experiment. We're looking at the soul of the legal system and asking a question that I know it might sound a bit like a conspiracy theory at first glance, but it's really a matter of strict jurisprudence. Is the modern American legal system operating under a stolen identity?
Stolen identity. That's a pretty strong hook. But I think you're hinting at something much darker, right? I mean, you've been throwing around the term structural treason in your notes.
I have, and I don't use it lightly. The specific charge is this. Has the state committed treason against its own foundations by severing the metaphysical root of its authority, specifically nature's God? And in doing so, has it quietly converted unalienable rights into, well, revocable government permissions?
See, right there, you're framing this as a crime. But I look at the same landscape and I see necessary evolution. You're setting up a cage match between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
It is a cage match. It's the battle between the deed to the property and the management agreement.
It's where we fundamentally disagree on the architecture. You view the Declaration as the unchangeable deed. I view the Constitution as a supreme law that actually, governs the House. But let's back up. Because you are arguing that by ignoring nature's God, the state has become illegitimate. That is a massive claim.
It is. And, my argument is that the founding asserts a very specific vertical architecture. It's almost like a gravity well, right? You have the source, nature's God, and that leads to rights. Those rights are endowed, not created. Then, and only then, do rights lead to government. If you remove the source, you don't just secularize the state. You invert the entire hierarchy. You turn the state into a state god and rights into priced permissions.
Well, and I know you love that state god phrase, but look, I come at this from a completely different direction. The Declaration, it's a beautiful founding document, absolutely. It's powerful. It's poetry even, but it is not binding law. You cannot walk into a courtroom and cite the creator to get out of a parking ticket. Rights in a modern complex society aren't grounded in metaphysics. They're grounded in secular dignity, in reason, and frankly, in enforcement. To call administrative governance treason because it doesn't pray to an 18th century concept is, well, it's a dangerous category error.
Let's dig into that architecture, because poetry is a dismissive word for the document that literally created the country. The American founding isn't just a collection of nice sentiments. It posits a specific flow of power. Source precedes rights, rights precede government, government precedes statutes. The Declaration states clearly that rights are unalienable because they are endowed.
Endowed by their creator, yes. I know the line.
But think about the mechanics of that word, endowed. It means the government didn't give them to you. And if the government didn't give them, the government cannot take them away. That chain only works if the first term, the creator, is treated as a jurisdictional fact. So if the state formally separates God from law, meaning it treats that transcendent constraint as inadmissible in court, then the state severs its own foundation. The building still stands, sure, the walls are there, but it becomes what I call a suspended simulation. It's held up by force, by money, by habit, rather than the original authority it claims.
Suspended simulation. It sounds like something out of the Matrix. But look, if we're being honest about legal history, the Constitution doesn't mention God. It mentions we the people. The people are the engine here, not some deity.
But we the people only have the authority to institute a government because they are already sovereign. And where did they get that sovereignty? The Declaration says they got it from their creator. So if you cut that cord, the system becomes an ontological fraud. It uses the vocabulary of the founding, words like liberty and rights, but it operates on a completely reversed hierarchy, where the government defines what those rights are. It has effectively seized ownership from the people.
I see why you think that. I do. But let me offer a different perspective. You are placing an immense amount of legal weight on a document that was essentially a breakup letter to King George. Historically and legally, the Constitution is the supreme law, and the Constitution operates on legal positivism.
Let's define that for the listener, so we aren't just throwing textbook terms around.
Sure, legal positivism basically means this. The law is whatever we wrote down and agreed to enforce. It's not about finding a law floating in the clouds or in the mind of God. It's about what the legislature actually enacted.
Exactly. Law is the command of the sovereign, and my point is, if the sovereign is the state, then you have no rights, you only have permissions.
That's a leap. The Constitution protects rights. Separation isn't about erasing a foundation, it's about preventing theocracy. Nature's God is simply too vague to be a legal standard. I mean, imagine a judge trying to rule on a copyright case by asking, what would nature's God do? It's absurd. Modern society is complex. We require administrative agencies to define and manage liberties because we cannot run a 21st century superpower on vague metaphysical abstractions. Rights exist because we have courts and police to enforce them, not because of an endowment that no judge can verify.
You're touching on the core conflict here, right? The deed versus the management agreement. You're arguing the Constitution is supreme. I'm arguing the Constitution is a contract built to administer a prior reality.
But a contract is what binds us. If I sign a contract, that's the law between us.
But a management agreement cannot redefine the land into non-existence. If I own a building and I hire a property manager and that manager rewrites the deed to say he owns the building, he is no longer managing, he is seizing, he's stealing. You say the Declaration isn't law, I say it is the jurisdictional premise. It's the BIOS of the system. You can't use the OS, the Constitution, to declare the BIOS optional while still booting up on the BIOS's reputation.
I mean, that's a compelling metaphor, the BIOS and the OS, but it fails a reality test, doesn't it? I mean, strictly speaking, courts do not enforce the Declaration. So if the text isn't actually binding, then this hierarchy you're describing, well, it's rhetorical. It's not juridical. You might want it to be the BIOS, but the computer seems to run just fine without referencing it.
Does it run fine, or is it crashing? I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're confusing enforceability with legitimacy. That is the exact positive validity trap. A system can have positive validity, meaning courts enforce it, police arrest you for it, while lacking ontological legitimacy, meaning it contradicts its own stated origin. If the system claims its legitimacy comes from endowed rights, but its courts say we don't recognize the endowment, then the system is lying about its own authority.
It's not lying, it's evolving. You seem to imply that if we remove God from the equation, we inevitably end up with tyranny. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. We don't need a deity to ground rights. We can use reason, we can use human dignity, we can use the social contract, we can just, agree that hurting people is wrong.
But see, this idea of neutrality is a myth. It's a myth in a vacuum. That is the critical point I think you're missing. You think you can just have this neutral, secular space.
A secular state is neutral. It favors no religion.
No. If the state bars a higher authority from the courtroom, the state becomes the highest authority by default. There is no empty space in power dynamics. If you say we ground rights in human dignity, I have to ask, who defines dignity?
We define it. Collectively, through democratic processes, through voting, through evolving standards of decency.
Exactly. Collectively. That means the majority defines it. That means 51% of the people get to define what dignity is for the other 49%. If dignity is defined by a vote, it becomes variable status. It is no longer an unalienable right. An unalienable right is a hard stop that the majority cannot cross. If the source is not external to the system, then the system has no limits, except the ones it sets for itself. And a system that sets its own limits has no limits.
But we see secular democracies functioning all over Europe with a high respect for human rights, and they're not invoking nature's God in every statute. They aren't turning into dictatorships.
Aren't they? Or are they just slowly drifting? This leads to my paywall fracture argument. This is where the rubber meets the road. You say rights exist because of enforcement. I say, look at the empirical reality. When you remove the endowment, the idea that rights are free gifts from a source, you are left with permissions that must be administered. And administration costs money.
So you're talking about the cost of legal representation.
I'm talking about the marketization of sovereignty itself. If rights are not endowed, they are permissions. And permissions are priced. We see this everywhere. Let's take a concrete example. Suppose a billionaire defames a working-class mechanic, destroys his reputation online.
Okay.
The mechanic has a right to his reputation, correct? In theory.
Yes, legally.
But in your positivist world where rights are defined by enforcement, does he actually have that right? No, because to enforce it, he needs $50,000 for a retainer just to start the lawsuit. The billionaire has the money. The mechanic does not. So the right effectively ceases to exist for the mechanic.
Okay, but hold on. That sounds like a problem of access to justice. It's an economic issue, right? It's not a theological one.
It is absolutely theological, because if the right was truly endowed, the state would have a duty to protect it, regardless of the mechanic's bank account. But because the right is viewed as a procedure, it is subject to market forces. When the source is removed, price fills the vacuum. The market god replaces nature's god.
That's a very cynical take. Money in politics and law is corruption, absolutely. But you're conflating expensive lawyers with the death of God. It's a flaw in human nature, in capitalism, not a structural defect caused by secularism. I mean, even in a religious state, lawyers would want to get paid.
But in a system without a transcendent constraint, power is the only constraint. And in modernity, power is financial. Therefore, the corruption you see is not a bug. It is the structural result of removing that vertical anchor. If the state doesn't answer to a higher law, it answers to the highest bidder. The paywall is the proof that rights have become products. We are buying our liberties back from the state, one fee at a time.
Okay, let's pivot for a second, because you're painting a picture where we are trapped. But in a democracy, we're never truly trapped. This brings us to what you call the suicide pact. You argue that we are locked into this nature's God framework forever because some guys in wigs wrote it down in 1776. But I would argue for popular sovereignty. The people have the right to be wrong. Through Article 5 of the Constitution, the people can amend the document.
Be very careful there.
Why?
If the American people decided tomorrow, via supermajority, to remove all references to a creator and establish a purely secular compact, they have the sovereign right to do so. That's the definition of freedom.
That is the halting problem of your argument. You're walking right into a logical trap.
How is democracy a trap? Because a sovereign cannot use its sovereignty to destroy the very definition of its sovereignty. If the people vote to remove the endowment, they are reclassifying themselves. They go from being bearers of unalienable rights to biological assets of the state.
That is rhetorical hyperbole. They're just changing the legal grounding. They aren't selling themselves into slavery.
Aren't they? If you vote to say, my rights do not come from a creator, they come from the state, you have just voted to make the state your owner. You have handed the title deed of your soul to the government. This is the Article 5 trap. You can amend procedures, you can amend the number of senators, the tax code, but you cannot amend the deed into non-existence and still claim to be the owner.
But if the people choose that, if they look at the world and say, you know what, we prefer a secular social contract, are you saying they are forbidden from doing so?
I am saying that is not evolution. It is self-negation. It's suicide. You cannot have a right to destroy the concept of a right. That is a logical contradiction. It's like a democracy voting to end voting. Once you do it, the game is over. You don't get to vote again.
I think we're hitting a wall on the metaphysics, so let's look at the practical implication. Because this is where your argument, I think, scares people. Your argument seems to imply that unless the law confesses God, it is illegitimate. That sounds dangerously like theocracy.
I knew you'd go there.
Well, it's the logical conclusion. If law must confess God, we end up with religious rule. And history shows that is not a path to liberty. It's a path to inquisitions, moral policing, sectarian violence. If I have to choose between a market God and a church God, I'll take the market. At least the market just wants my money, not my soul.
And I want to be very precise here, because this is the most common misunderstanding. I am distinguishing between church and source.
That is a fine distinction to make in a podcast studio, but in the real world, source quickly becomes my church's doctrine.
They don't have to be the same. See, the argument is not that the church should govern. That is theocracy, and I am completely against it. The argument is that the state is not ultimate. That is anti-statism. The Establishment Clause blocks the church from ruling. My framework blocks the state from self-deification.
But who interprets this source? If it's not the church and it's not the state,
Who says what nature's God requires?
The text of the deed acts as a negative constraint. Think of it as a veto power, not a legislative agenda. It just says, the state cannot do X, Y, or Z, because the state did not create the human being. It's a self-correcting system. The source serves as a limit on what the state can claim to own. It doesn't require a national religion. It requires a national humility. It's the difference between a judge saying, I have the power to do anything, and a judge saying, there are some things I cannot touch.
But you have to admit, structural treason is a loaded term. You're effectively accusing the entire judiciary of being traitors.
I use it intentionally to wake people up. Treason is the betrayal of the sovereign. If the people are the sovereign because they are endowed by a creator, then a system that erases the creator is, in effect, overthrowing the people. It is war by pen, by procedure, by reinterpretation.
I still think that goes too far. I see a system struggling to adapt. The modern state isn't trying to be God. It's trying to manage traffic, healthcare, the internet, artificial intelligence, a global economy. Complexity requires administrative flexibility. If we are rigidly bound to an 18th century metaphysical sentence, we can't function. We need the EPA, we need the FDA, we need zoning laws.
And I would say complexity can justify procedures, but it cannot justify sovereignty inversion. You can have traffic laws without claiming you own the driver. You can have the FDA without claiming you own the body of the citizen. The problem isn't the administration, it's the source of the authority for that administration.
Let's just look at the paywall again, because I think that hits home for listeners more than the theology. You're saying that because we don't have this free endowment, rights are becoming luxury goods.
Yes, that is the empirical proof. If rights were truly unalienable and endowed, our legal system would look radically different. It wouldn't be a game of who can outspend whom.
So, in your nature's God system, how does that change? Does God pay the legal fees?
In a system that recognized the endowment as a jurisdictional fact, the court would have to act as a guardian, not just a referee. Currently, the judge sits back and watches two lawyers fight, and whoever fights better wins. That's a sporting event. If the judge acknowledged that the mechanic has a God-given right to his reputation, the judge would have a duty to protect that right, regardless of the mechanic's ability to pay.
But courts do appoint defenders. We do have fee waivers. The system tries.
It tries as a charity, not as a duty. That's the difference. In a state God system, the state grants you legal aid as a benevolence. Here, have a crumb. In a nature's God system, the state owes you protection because it is your subordinate. We have flipped the relationship. The state acts like the patron, and we are the clients.
That is a compelling argument, though I do worry it's utopian. But have you considered that maybe the state God is just a necessary evil of scale? You call it a suspended simulation, but maybe it's just the only way to keep the lights on in a country of 350 million people.
And that is the terrifying thought, that we have built a machine so big that it cannot afford to acknowledge its own limitations, that we have built a Leviathan that must eat its creator, the people, just to sustain its own caloric intake.
We are coming to the end of our time, and we should probably wrap this up.
So, let me summarize my position. The modern state is, I believe, a suspended simulation. It preserves the outer form of legitimacy. We have elections, we have courts, we have the Constitution under glass in the archives, but it has liquidated the inner source that makes that legitimacy coherent. By warring against the source, the system commits structural treason against the people, turning us from subjects into subjects of a managerial elite.
And my summary is that the system is adapting, not betraying. While the metaphysical critique is, poetic and intellectually stimulating, the practical reality is that rights require enforcement, and enforcement requires a state with the power to define and manage. Calling this treason ignores the necessity of keeping a complex society from collapsing into chaos. We need administrative flexibility, not a theology exam for our statutes. The danger isn't that the state forgets God. The danger is that the state fails to function.
But I leave you with the reflection on the paywall fracture. Whether you accept the theology or not, just look at the empirical reality around you. Without a free endowment, rights are becoming priced permissions. If you can't afford the lawyer, you don't have the right.
That is a danger we must guard against, I agree. But I believe we can fix it through reform, legal aid, better laws, transparency, not by trying to resurrect a deistic worldview that may not fit a pluralistic society.
The question remains for the listener. Is the American system a self-correcting system anchored in truth, or a self-destructing system operating on a stolen identity?
That is the debate.
Thank you for listening to The Debate.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today, well, honestly, I'm staring at the table in front of me, and I'm a little intimidated.
I don't blame you.
Usually we have a stack of Wired articles, maybe a Wall Street Journal piece, some tech blogs. Today, we have one thing.
Just one.
It is a brick.
It's not that big physically, but intellectually, yeah, it's a cinder block.
The title is Nature's God, the Jurisdictional Ground of American Sovereignty.
It's helpful.
It is. I mean, just saying that out loud makes me feel like I need to put on a powdered wig. It sounds like the driest, most academic thing we could possibly talk about.
Right.
But you promised me, you swore to me, that this is actually a horror story.
It is. It's a horror story about your house. Or rather, who owns your house.
Okay, so before we get into the dense philosophy, let's set the stage. Because when I started reading this, I expected a political manifesto.
Sure, that's what you'd think.
I expected, vote for this guy, or this policy's bad. But it's not that at all. It feels like someone looked at the source code of the United States.
Yeah.
And found a line of code that just shouldn't be there.
That is a perfect way to put it. It's not a crash. The computer is still running. The screen is on.
Everything looks fine on the surface.
But the operating system has been fundamentally swapped out while we were sleeping.
So give us the hook. You used an analogy when we were prepping that I think frames this perfectly. The landlord thing.
Right. So imagine you live in a house. And let's be clear. You own this house.
Totally mine.
You have the title deed. It's yours. And you decide to hire a property manager, a guy to fix the plumbing, mow the lawn.
Make sure the neighbors don't set your fence on fire.
All that stuff.
Okay. Pretty standard. That's the government in this analogy.
Exactly. The government is the property manager. You, the citizen, are the owner.
Got it.
You sign a contract with the manager, let's call that contract the Constitution, that says, here is what you can do. You can fix the roof, you can collect a little fee for your trouble, but you work for me.
Sounds like a republic.
It is. But now, imagine a few years go by, you're sitting in your living room, watching TV, and the property manager walks in.
Doesn't knock.
Doesn't knock. He just walks in, looks around, and says, hey, I've decided that I actually built the dirt this house sits on.
What?
And because I built the land, I own everything on it, including you.
I'd tell him to get out. Immediately.
Well, you try. But he pulls out a piece of paper, a new rule he wrote himself, that says, the manager is the source of all authority on this property.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly he starts charging you rent to sit on your own couch. He tells you what you can watch on TV. He tells you when you can go to sleep.
And when you object, when you say, wait, I have a deed.
He says that deed is just a piece of historical poetry. It's not law. I am the law.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
And the premise of this book,
Yeah.
this treatise, is that this has actually happened.
The argument is that this is the current state of American law. The author claims that 90% of what we call law today,
90%.
90, is what he terms state god fiction and structural treason.
Okay, state god fiction. That is a heavy phrase. I think most people listening, and honestly myself included, would say, come on.
Right, sounds extreme.
We don't worship the state. We complain about the BMV. We hate taxes. Nobody thinks the government is God.
That's where the deep dive gets interesting. This isn't about worship in the sense of, lighting candles or singing hymns.
It's not religious worship.
No, it's about jurisdiction. It's about who has the final say on reality. If the state is the entity that defines what a right is, then functionally, operationally, the state is acting as God.
Okay, I want to unpack that, but I also want to be really clear about our mission today. Because this text, it's aggressive. It calls things treason.
It does.
It talks about ontological indictment. We aren't here to say, hey, go overthrow the government.
No, absolutely not. That's not the point.
We are here to look at the logic. We are strictly analyzing the argument presented in Nature's God. We want to see if the math holds up.
That's it.
Because if the logic is true, well, then we have a very big problem.
We do. And just to reiterate for the listeners, this cuts across party lines. This isn't a Democrat thing or a Republican thing.
Not at all.
In fact, the text argues that both sides are playing the same game. One side might want to use the manager's power to ban guns, and the other might want to use it to ban drugs. But both sides agree on one thing.
The manager is in charge.
The manager is in charge.
They're just fighting over who gets to hold the remote control, but nobody's asking why the manager is sitting on the couch in the first place.
Exactly. You've got it.
All right. Let's get into the machinery of this. The text talks about vertical architecture. That sounds like something an architect would say, not a lawyer. What does it mean?
Think of it as the BIOS of the American system.
BIOS.
The basic input-output system. The text argues that the founding wasn't just a collection of cool ideas like freedom is good. It was a specific structural hierarchy of authority.
A chain of command.
A chain of creation. And it looks like this. At the very, very top, you have the source. The Declaration refers to this as nature's God or the creator.
Okay, so God.
God. Or at least some kind of higher authority. Then, flowing down from that source, you have the human being.
Right.
And specifically, the endowment of rights.
Endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Okay. That line.
That's the one. So God creates man and gives him rights. That's step 1 and 2. Then, man creates government.
That's step 3.
And finally, government creates statutes or, laws. That's step 4.
So the chain is God, man, and his rights, government, and then laws at the bottom.
Precisely. And the directionality is everything. It flows down. This means that government is downstream from rights.
Okay.
The government is the creature, not the creator.
This is the part I think we just gloss over in civics class. We memorize the preamble, but we don't think about the engineering.
We don't.
If I build a robot, the robot works for me. I don't work for the robot.
Right. And the robot certainly doesn't have the authority to turn around and tell you that you don't exist.
Yeah, that would be a problem.
Yeah. The text emphasizes that the government was created for one specific job: to secure these rights, not to grant them, not to define them, to secure them.
It's the security guard.
It is the security guard. Now imagine the security guard turns to you and says, "I'm going to lock you in the basement for your own safety."
I'd say, you're fired.
Of course. But if the security guard believes he hired you, well, then you're in trouble.
This brings up the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
I feel like in modern politics, the Declaration is treated like, I don't know, like the liner notes of an album.
That's a great way to put it.
It's the vibe of the country, but the Constitution is the actual music. The text seems to take a very, very different view.
Oh, absolutely. The text argues that treating the Declaration as just history or poetry is a fatal error.
Fatal how?
A catastrophic legal error.
Okay, walk me through that.
Let's go back to the House analogy. The Constitution is the management agreement.
Right, the rule book.
It lays out the rules for the Congress, the president, the courts. It says Congress can do X, the president can do Y. It's the job description.
Okay, makes sense.
But the Declaration. The Declaration is the title deed. It is the document that asserts ownership. It answers the question, by what authority does this nation exist at all?
And the answer it gives is?
We exist by the authority of the laws of nature and of nature's God.
So without the Declaration, the Constitution is just a management agreement for a property that has no owner.
Exactly. It's a management contract floating in a void. If you sever the Constitution from the Declaration, you're saying we have a government, but we don't have a foundation.
And the author argues that this is exactly what allows the manager to steal the house.
It's the loophole.
If the title deed is just poetry, then the management agreement is the only document left. And whoever runs the agreement owns the reality.
That makes perfect sense. If I lose the deed to my house and the property manager has a contract saying he runs the place, eventually he owns it.
Which leads us to that word, unalienable.
Right.
Unalienable. It's a fun word to say. Unalienable.
It is, but what does it actually mean?
I was just assumed it meant really important, like, super rights.
And most people do. But legally, alienation means the transfer of title.
Okay.
If I sell you my car, I am alienating the title from myself to you. If I give you my watch, I am alienating the watch.
So unalienable means untransferable. You can't transfer it.
It means you cannot give it away, even if you want to.
Really?
You cannot sell your liberty. You cannot sign a contract entering into slavery. You cannot vote to remove your own rights. It is a hard stop on your own will.
Wait, so even if I want to give up my freedom, The system says I can't.
Not under the original American system, because you didn't create the freedom.
The creator did.
Right. You are a trustee of the rights, not the ultimate source. It's like, okay, imagine you are renting a car. Can you sell the engine?
No. It's not my car to sell.
Exactly. You can drive it, you can use it, but you can't sell the parts because the title belongs to Hertz. In this philosophy, the title to your rights belongs to the creator. You hold them, you enjoy them, but you lack the jurisdiction to destroy them.
And this is why the God part matters so much to this argument.
This is the absolute crux of it. The text argues, if the source of the right is human, if it comes from the state or the voters or the Constitution,
Then it can be changed by humans.
then it is alienable. Because humans can change their minds. The state can repeal a law. The voters can pass a new amendment.
So the only way a right can be truly unalienable, untouchable by anyone forever, is if its source is above the human system.
That's the logic. If there's no nature's God, there are no unalienable rights. There are just rights we currently agree on.
And what we agree on today, we might disagree on tomorrow.
Bingo. If you delete the creator, you delete the You just have alienable rights. Rights that can be linched, sold, or revoked by new management.
Which brings us to the inversion. Section 2. The text calls this the virus.
And this is where we have to talk about something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Separation of church and state.
Okay. Deep breath. I consider myself a pretty secular guy. I think most of our listeners agree that we don't want the government telling us how to pray.
Nobody wants that.
We don't want a state religion. We don't want the Ayatollah running the Senate.
And the source material agrees with you 100%.
It does.
Really.
Because it feels like it's pushing for a religious foundation.
It's pushing for a metaphysical foundation, not a religious institution. There's a huge difference.
Okay, explain that.
The expert in the text explains that the First Amendment was designed to be a firewall against an ecclesiastical establishment.
English, please.
It was meant to stop the government from creating a Church of America, like the Church of England.
Okay.
It was meant to stop forced tithes. It was meant to ensure that a Baptist, a Catholic, and a Quaker could all run for office without passing some kind of theology test.
Okay, that's the separation I like. I'm on board with that.
Right. But the text argues that in the last 100 years or so, we have reinterpreted separation of church and state to mean separation of God and state.
What's the difference?
The difference is authority. The founders separated the church, the institution, from the state to protect individual conscience.
Okay.
But they never intended to separate the source of rights from the state, because then the state has no boss.
I see exactly where this is going. If you say the state cannot acknowledge God, you aren't just being neutral.
No.
You are severing that vertical chain of authority.
Exactly. You are cutting the anchor line. And once you cut the line to the creator, the state, by default, becomes the highest authority in the universe.
The state becomes God.
It becomes the state god. It doesn't need to call itself Yahweh or Zeus. It just needs to be the final reference point.
The thing that decides what is real and what is not.
That's it.
And this is the flip, the inversion.
Yes. The chain completely flips. Instead of God rights on state, it becomes state rights permissions.
Permissions. That's a scary word when you apply it to something like free speech.
Yeah. But that is the inevitable logic, isn't it? If there is no pre-existing God-given right to speech, then where does your right to speak come from?
It comes from the First Amendment.
And who wrote the First Amendment? And
Yeah.
who interprets it?
Judges.
And who can change it?
The state.
So it's not a right anymore, is it? It's a license, like a fishing license.
That's a powerful analogy.
A fishing license is a permission granted by the state. They can revoke it, they can set limits on it, they can charge you for it. The text argues that in a secularized state god system, all rights become fishing licenses.
You know, this reminds me of something. During the pandemic, regardless of where you stood on the lockdowns, there was this phrase that kept popping up.
I know what you're going to say.
Essential services. And the government got to decide what was essential and what wasn't.
That is a perfect example of the inversion in practice.
I remember thinking, wait, who decides if my livelihood is essential? And the answer was the governor. The state.
And under the state god model, that is perfectly consistent. The state grants the privilege of commerce. The state grants the privilege of assembly. Therefore, the state can pause those privileges for the greater good, which, by the way, the state also defines.
Whereas under the founding model,
Under the founding model, the right to assemble is endowed. The state has no jurisdiction to cancel it, period.
it can't.
The state might say, hey, it's dangerous out there, but it cannot forbid it because it doesn't own the right. It doesn't hold the title.
That is a massive, massive difference. It's the difference between a parent telling a child what to do and a neighbor telling an adult what to do.
Correct. And we have slowly, over time, accepted the status of child. We ask for permission to build a shed. We ask for permission to buy a gun. We ask for permission to start a business.
The Permission Society.
And the source argues that this permission society is only possible because we stopped acknowledging the endowment.
Okay, so we've got the philosophy. But how does this actually work in the real world? I mean, how did we get here? Did someone just flip a switch one day?
No, it was a slow drift, powered by a legal theory called legal positivism.
Section 3. The mechanism. Legal positivism. It sounds like a self-help book. Stay positive.
I wish. Legal positivism is much drier, and as the book argues, much more dangerous. In the 1800s, legal scholars started to get, uncomfortable with all this God talk.
Sure.
They wanted law to be a science, like physics.
Okay, I can respect that. Science is good.
Sure, but in physics, you only care about what you can observe. You don't care about morality. Gravity isn't good or bad, it just is.
Right.
So legal positivists said, law is simply the command of the sovereign backed by force.
The command of the sovereign backed by force.
Meaning, if the government passes a law and they have the police to enforce it, it is a valid law, period.
So there's no higher law to check it against?
None.
So, if the government passes a law that says everyone with blue eyes must pay a 90% tax, and they pass it correctly through Congress and the president signs it, under legal positivism, that's just the law.
Yes. You might argue it's bad policy. You might vote to change it, but you cannot argue it is illegitimate. You cannot say this law is void because it violates the laws of nature.
Because the positivist says nature doesn't have laws. The state has laws.
It is exactly how we run things now. We judge laws by procedure, not by morality. Did it go through committee? Did the president sign it? Okay, it's law.
And the text calls the result of this the administrative cloud.
This is one of my favorite images in the book. Imagine a cloud. It's dense, it's foggy, and it's constantly shifting. That is our legal system today.
Give me a concrete example, because cloud is a bit abstract.
Okay. Let's talk about the EPA, or the IRS, or the ATF. Pick your favorite acronym.
Right.
Congress passes a vague law. We want clean water. That sounds great. Who opposes clean water?
Nobody. Of course not.
But then Congress hands the authority to the EPA to make rules to enforce that law. The EPA then generates 50,000 pages of regulations. And somewhere in there, they decide that a puddle in your backyard counts as a wetland.
And suddenly, I can't build a driveway because I have a federally protected puddle.
Right. Now, did you vote for the guy who wrote the puddle rule?
No. I don't even know who he is.
Did Congress vote on the puddle rule?
No. They just voted for clean water.
So who made the law?
An unelected bureaucrat.
An unelected bureaucrat in the administrative cloud. And under legal positivism, that rule has the force of law. If you violate it, you get fined. If you don't pay the fine, you go to jail.
That's author dominion. That's the phrase from the text.
Yes. It is the manager writing new clauses into the lease every single day.
And because the system is so complex, because the cloud is so thick, you have no idea what your rights are until the cloud strikes you with lightning.
You've got it.
You know, I have a friend who runs a small trucking company. Just 3 trucks. He told me he spends more on compliance consultants than he does on fuel. He said, I don't know if I'm breaking the law or not. I just pay a guy to tell me I'm okay for this month.
That is the perfect illustration. Your friend doesn't have rights. He has compliance strategies. He's navigating the manager's maze. He isn't walking on his own land.
This leads us to the part of the book that I think is the most damning. Because up until now, we've been talking about philosophy and, bureaucracy.
Right, it's been abstract.
But Section 4 is about money.
The paywall fracture.
This hit me hard because I think regular people feel this in their bones. We know the system is rigged, but we usually think it's just corruption.
Like someone bribed a judge.
Yeah. But the text says no, the rigging is built into the definitions themselves.
Correct. The argument is simple. If you remove the endowment, the idea that your rights are a gift from God, then your rights are only as good as your ability to enforce them.
Okay, walk us through that.
Okay. Let's go back to your friend with the trucking company. Let's say the EPA fines him $50,000 for a violation he didn't commit.
Okay.
If his rights are endowed, then that fine is theoretically void if it violates his due process or property rights.
Yep.
But in the positivist system, the fine is presumed valid.
So he's guilty until proven innocent.
In effect, yes.
Yeah.
So how does he fight it?
He has to hire a lawyer.
A lawyer who charges $500 an hour. He has to file motions. He has to show up in administrative court, which, by the way, is often run by the same agency that fined him.
Talk about a conflict of interest.
It's a closed loop. So fighting the fine might cost him $100,000. The fine is $50,000. What does he do?
He pays the fine, even if he's innocent. It's just business.
Exactly. He settles. He buys his way out of trouble. Now imagine a massive corporation in the same situation.
They have a whole floor of lawyers.
They have an in-house legal team. They have lobbyists they can afford to fight, or better yet, they can afford to lobby the agency to write the rule in their favor in the first place.
So the big guy buys the law and the little guy pays the fine.
And that is the paywall. Without a higher moral authority that levels the playing field, without a concept that the little guy is sacred, everything reduces to market dynamics.
Rights become a luxury good.
They become a luxury good. And that's the sovereignty market.
The sovereignty market. Wow.
Yes. If you have capital, you have rights. If you don't have capital, you have vulnerability.
This just destroys the idea of neutrality. We always say the law is blind.
But the text argues, if you banish the source god, you create a vacuum. And in a vacuum, price becomes the ruler. Money fills the void left by morality.
That is bleak. It explains why everything feels like a shakedown. It explains why the legal system feels like a casino where the house always wins.
It's the commodification of justice. And the author argues this is the direct, unavoidable result of the inversion. If rights are permissions, permissions are for sale.
Okay, I have to push back.
Yep.
I have to, because this all sounds logical, but it also sounds a bit, I don't know, convenient for the religious argument.
It does.
Section 5 of the outline is steel manning and destroying the dissent. I want to play the lawyer here.
Please. The text demands a max stress test. Bring your best objections.
Okay, objection A. And this is the one I hear from every law professor I've ever interviewed.
The big one.
The Declaration of Independence is not law. It's a preamble. It's a nice letter we sent to King George. But the courts enforce the Constitution. They do not enforce the Declaration.
Right.
So basing your whole legal theory on the Declaration is like basing your traffic laws on a poem by Robert Frost.
That is the standard dissent, and the author destroys it by distinguishing between enforceability and legitimacy.
Okay, explain the difference.
Okay, imagine you build a skyscraper, you have the foundation, and you have the penthouse. You live in the penthouse, you hang your pictures in the penthouse, you don't live in the foundation, you don't hang pictures on the concrete slab underground.
Makes sense.
But if the foundation cracks, what happens to the penthouse?
It falls down, the whole thing.
The Declaration is the foundation. The Constitution is the structure built on top of it.
Okay.
The courts operate in the structure. They don't cite the foundation in every ruling, just like you don't check the foundation every time you open a door. But, and this is the key, if the structure detaches from the foundation, it loses its structural integrity.
So the argument is, just because judges ignore the Declaration doesn't mean they can ignore it without breaking the whole system.
Exactly. The text calls it stolen identity. If the U.S. government claims to be the legitimate heir of 1776, it must accept the logic of 1776.
It can't have it both ways.
It can't. If it rejects the Declaration, it is admitting that it is no longer the Republic. It's just a new empire squatting in the old buildings.
Okay, I see that. It's like a king claiming to be royalty, but admitting he was adopted from a different family. The claim to the throne is gone.
Or a property manager claiming he has a contract, but admitting the owner never actually signed it. The contract's worthless.
All right, let's try objection B. This is the secular humanist argument. And frankly, this is where I land most days.
A lot of people do.
We don't need God to have rights. We have human dignity. We have reason. We have empathy. We can ground our rights in the fact that we are sentient beings who deserve respect. Why do we need the Sky Daddy to make it work?
Sky Daddy. I love that.
You know what I mean. It feels archaic.
I do. And the author anticipates this. He calls it the jurisdictional trap.
The jurisdictional trap. Okay.
Here is the problem. You say we ground rights in human dignity. Okay. Who defines dignity?
We do. Society does. Humanity does.
Society, meaning the majority of voters. Or the Supreme Court.
I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, one of those.
Okay. So if the majority of voters decides that a certain group of people, say people with low IQs or people of a certain race or unborn people, do not have dignity, what happens to their rights?
Well, then they lose them.
Exactly. If dignity is defined by humans, then dignity is a variable. It can change. It can be voted away.
I see the trap. If humans define dignity, humans can redefine it whenever it's convenient.
And we have. Look at history. We define dignity to exclude slaves. We define it to exclude women. We define it to exclude Jews in Europe. If the definition comes from us, it is flawed because we are flawed.
So the God variable isn't about theology. It's about having an anchor that humans can't move. A fixed point.
Precisely. It's a vertical constraint. The text argues you need a source of rights that is binding on the state. If the source is reason, the state can just say, we have better reasons. If the source is God, the state has to say, okay, that's above my pay grade.
So you either have a God that bosses the state around, or you have a state that bosses dignity around.
There is no middle ground. That is the ontological indictment.
Wow. Okay, one more objection. Objection C. The we the people argument.
The populist one.
Yeah. We are a democracy, or a republic. If we the people vote to get rid of unalienable rights, if we vote for a socialist utopia or a fascist dictatorship, isn't that our right? We are the sovereign. We have the right to be wrong.
This is the suicide pact argument, and the answer the text gives is the halting problem.
Like the computer code thing.
Yes. Can a computer write a code that tells it to delete its own operating system?
I mean, it would crash. It would cease to function.
Exactly. The argument is a sovereign cannot use its sovereignty to destroy the source of its sovereignty.
Say that 5 times fast.
We, the people, derive our authority from the fact that we are endowed with rights. If we vote to say we are not endowed with rights, we are just biological assets of the state, we are deleting the very authority we use to cast the vote.
It's a paradox, a logical contradiction.
It's a nullity. It's like using a power of attorney to sign a document saying, I do not exist. If you don't exist, the signature is void. The action cancels itself out.
So we can't legally vote ourselves into slavery.
You can physically do it. You can put on the chains, but you cannot legally do it within the logic of the American founding. The moment you vote away your endowment, the vote itself becomes invalid.
That is structurally fascinating.
Yeah.
It means there is a floor we cannot fall through, even if we want to.
Or at least there should be. The text argues that we have smashed through that floor and are currently free-falling, pretending we are flying.
Which brings us to the verdict. Section 6. Structural treason. Now, again, I have to ask, treason, that is a capital crime. It implies intent.
It does.
Are you saying that bureaucrats at the EPA are traitors?
Not in the sense that they are secretly emailing China. The text calls it ontological treason. It's treason against the reality of the system.
Okay, distinguish that for me. Treason against reality.
Traditional treason is betraying the government to a foreign power. Structural treason is the government betraying the people to itself.
Ooh, that's good. Betraying the people to itself.
It is the act of overthrowing the fundamental order, the fact that rights are superior to government while keeping the outer shell intact.
The stolen identity again.
Yes. The text says the system uses the vocabulary of the light, words like liberty, justice, rights, equality, to perform the operations of the shadow.
Which are?
Control, pricing, permissions, surveillance.
That is poetic. And absolutely terrifying. Vocabulary of the light, operations of the shadow.
It's a masquerade. The manager wears the owner's clothes. He sits at the owner's desk. He uses the owner's stationery. But he is using it to evict the owner.
And the author insists treason is the only word that fits this.
Yes, because it is a breach of the highest trust. The government is the trustee. We are the beneficiaries. If the trustee steals the trust fund and claims it was his all along, that is the ultimate betrayal.
So, what do we do? Section 7. The path forward. Because usually when I hear this kind of God country talk, it ends with a call for a theocracy.
I know.
We need to make the Bible the law of the land.
And I want to be very, very clear here. The text explicitly rejects theocracy.
It does.
Emphatically. It argues that theocracy is just another form of the inversion. In a theocracy, the church replaces the state as the manager. But it's still a manager telling you what to do.
So we don't want the church in charge, and we don't want the state in charge.
We want the endowment in charge. The goal is what the text calls a minimal metaphysical commitment.
Minimal.
Minimal. The state doesn't need to be Christian or Jewish or Muslim. It just needs to admit one thing. I am not God.
That's it. That's the whole commitment.
That's the starting point. The state must structurally acknowledge that there is a limit to its power that it did not create and cannot cross.
It sounds like humility. Institutional humility.
It is. The text points out that the founders were a mixed bag. Jefferson was a deist who literally cut the miracles out of his Bible.
Right.
Adams was a Unitarian. Franklin was? Well, Franklin was Franklin.
He was a party animal with a kite.
Exactly. But they all agreed on the structure. They all agreed that rights come from up there, not down here. You don't need a national religion to agree on that. You just need a negative constraint, a veto power against the state.
So how do we restore this? The restoration vector. Can we pass a law? Can we sue the government into submission?
The text says, you cannot ask the inverted state to fix itself. That's the procedural trap.
Right. Asking the manager to please stop stealing your house, he's going to say no, and then write a rule saying you can't ask anymore.
So the fix must be cultural lead. It has to come from the owners.
Us.
Us. We have to reclaim the title deed in our own minds first. We have to stop speaking the language of permissions.
Give me an example. How do I change my language day to day?
Instead of saying, I hope the government allows me to do this, you say, the government has no jurisdiction over this.
Instead of asking, is this allowed? Ask, who owns this right in the first place?
Yes. It's a mindset shift from subject to citizen, or really from tenant to landlord.
You're acting like the owner again.
Exactly. The text calls it operationalizing nature's God. You use the concept of the creator not to force religion on people, but to force limits on the government. You use it as a shield.
You cannot cross this line. Not because I say so, but because the title deed says so.
Now you're thinking like a founder.
It's empowering.
But
it's also daunting because the administrative cloud is huge. It's got armies of lawyers, and I've just got my podcast microphone.
But the cloud is made of vapor. It relies on your compliance. It relies on you believing that the manager owns the house. The moment the owner wakes up, the dynamic changes.
That brings us to the end, the summary of the slam. Let's recap the logic chain one last time because I want this to stick.
Let's do it. 1, if rights are unalienable, they must come from above the government.
Check.
2, if the government refuses to acknowledge anything above itself, it makes itself God by default.
Check.
3, when the state is God, rights stop being rights and become permissions.
Check.
And 4, permissions are sold to the highest bidder, the paywall fracture.
And the result is what we have today, a marketplace of privileges masquerading as a republic of rights.
Correct. And I want to leave the listener with one final image. The text calls it the suspended simulation.
Okay, paint the picture for us.
Imagine you are walking through Washington, D.C. The buildings are impressive. The marble is white. The flags are flying. The courts are in session. The elections are scheduled for November.
It all looks real. It looks solid.
But underneath, the foundation, that endowment, has been jackhammered away. The cables have been cut. The building is hovering in midair, held up by nothing but money and inertia.
That is a haunting image. It's like Wile E. Coyote running off the cliff, and his legs are still moving, but he hasn't looked down yet.
Exactly. Are we living in a republic? Or are we living in a management zone, held up by scaffolding?
And the question for the listener is,
look at your own life. Look at your property. Look at your business. Look at your freedom of speech. Do you own these things? Are they unalienable claims? Or are you just renting them from a manager who can evict you whenever he wants?
and if the rent goes up, can you afford to stay free?
That is the question.
Man, nature's God. It sounds like a sermon, but it hits like a subpoena.
It really does.
Thank you for walking us through this. My brain hurts, but in a good way.
Yeah.
Like I just woke up from a long, strange nap.
That's the entire goal.
All right, listeners, that's it for this deep dive. Don't just listen to this one. Think about it. Look at the manager a little differently tomorrow, and we'll see you next time.